Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something pretty wild. You know those super long medical reports? Like the ones that are just like packed with jargon.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So imagine having an AI that can like zoom through one of those reports and like cross-reference every single detail with the patient's medical history.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's exactly what this research paper is all about. It's called VeriFact, verifying facts in LLM-generated clinical text with electronic health records. And I think it's going to be a really interesting deep dive today.
Yeah, this is a huge issue in healthcare. Like, clinicians are already swamped. Like, can you imagine expecting them to comb through all those details and compare it with, like, the patient's entire history? It's, like, virtually impossible. It's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Totally, totally. Clinicians need like tools that can help them work smarter, not harder.
Exactly.
And that's where like VeriFact comes in, right? This AI is like a superpowered fact checker specifically for medical texts.
Right. And the way it works is actually really interesting. So VeriFact acts like a detective, right? And it takes the medical text and breaks it down into individual statements.
So instead of like the whole report, it's looking at like tiny little pieces of information.
Exactly, yeah,
Oh.
like treating each one as a separate clue.
Oh, wait,
Then VeriFact compares each of those clues against the patient's electronic health record.
their EHR.
Yeah, exactly. So think of the EHR as like the detective's case file.
Gotcha. Okay, so I can picture VeriFact like flipping through this giant files, comparing each statement. But how does it actually decide if a statement's accurate? Like it's not just a true or false situation, right?
No, not at all. You're exactly right. There's a lot of nuance to medical information.
Right.
And that's where some of these advanced AI techniques come in. So VeriFact uses something called retrieval-augmented generation. And essentially, this helps it like zero in on the most relevant information in the EHR, like highlighting the key pages in that massive case file.
So it's like an AI assistant that like knows exactly where to look.
Exactly, yeah. But it doesn't stop there. So VeriFact then uses another technique called LLM-as-Judge. It's like having a second AI that acts as a judge.
Wait, so there's multiple AIs working together here.
Yes.
That's wild.
It is. And so this judge AI analyzes the evidence and then renders a verdict on each statement, saying whether, this statement is supported, not supported, or maybe the EHR doesn't even address it at all.
Oh, so it's not just a yes or no. It's more nuanced than that.
Exactly, yeah.
And in the paper, they give a really great example of this. They use figure 2 to kind of show like VeriFact in action.
Yeah, they do. And it's a really good way to visualize the whole process. It shows how VeriFact pulls those statements, compares them to the EHR, and shows like which parts are backed up and which parts aren't.
Yeah. I'm looking at figure 2 now, and it's really clicking for me, like seeing the thought process. And what's really cool is like VeriFact doesn't just like give you a yes or no. It provides an explanation, like the detective saying, well, this is why I think this.
Exactly, yeah. That transparency is super important so that the clinicians actually understand how the AI came to its conclusion, and then they can trust it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, so this all sounds pretty incredible so far, like having an extra pair of eyes, like helping out the clinicians. But I imagine they didn't stop at just developing the system. They like tested it out against actual human clinicians.
They did, and get this, they actually found that VeriFact achieved higher agreement with like what they call a denoised human consensus than individual clinicians achieved with each other.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying VeriFact was more consistent and accurate than the average clinician?
Yeah, in this task.
No. Okay.
But like any system, it does have its limitations.
Okay, so even this superpowered AI fact checker isn't perfect. What are some of the things that can trip it up?
So one of the biggest challenges is what the researchers call information asymmetry. And basically, VeriFact performs best when it has access to all of the information that was used to generate the original medical text. But, in the real world, things aren't always so clear-cut.
Right, it's not always so perfect. Can you give me an example of like what information asymmetry might look like?
Sure. So imagine a patient with a really complex medical history. Maybe they've seen a ton of different doctors, had tests done at different labs, maybe even tried alternative therapies. Not all of that information might be in their EHR.
Right.
So VeriFact's trying to solve a puzzle, but it's missing some of the pieces.
Oh, okay, now I get it.
Yeah. If the AI doesn't have the full picture, it could potentially lead to some inaccuracies.
Okay. And are there any other limitations we should be aware of?
Another important one is VeriFact's reliance on the accuracy of the EHR itself.
Right.
Because remember, VeriFact uses the EHR as its like primary source of truth. So if the EHR has errors, then VeriFact can inherit those errors.
Right, so garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. So it just highlights the importance of maintaining accurate and complete EHRs, which is a big challenge in and of itself.
Totally, totally. So even though VeriFact has its limitations, it still seems like a pretty major step forward, especially given its performance against human clinicians. Like, what do you think? What does this mean for the future of healthcare?
Well, I think it's more about embracing the potential of AI to like augment human expertise. It's more of a collaboration, not a competition.
Right.
VeriFact can kind of handle like all the tedious stuff,
Yeah.
freeing up clinicians to focus on what they do best.
Makes sense. So let's dive a little deeper into the actual research. How did they train and test VeriFact? What kind of data did they use?
So they used a really interesting data set called MIM3. It's publicly available.
Okay.
It contains de-identified electronic health records from a large hospital.
Gotcha.
And they specifically focused on what are called brief hospital course narratives.
Okay, so they basically fed VeriFact like a bunch of real-world medical summaries.
Yeah, exactly.
And those summaries are like pretty detailed, right?
Oh, yeah, they're pretty dense. And they use these summaries to train VeriFact to recognize patterns, identify key information, compare it to the EHR. And here's the really interesting part. They also used them to test how well VeriFact could spot factual errors.
Okay, wait, hold on. Did they, like, intentionally introduce errors into the summaries?
Yeah.
How did they do that?
So they were pretty clever about it. They created two sets of summaries for testing. One set was written by human clinicians, kind of representing like the gold standard.
Okay, yeah.
The other set was generated by a large language model, like a really advanced AI writing program.
Oh, so they tested VeriFact on both human-written and AI-generated reports.
Yeah.
That's smart.
And remember how we were talking about information asymmetry?
Yeah.
Well, they actually deliberately included information in the human-written summaries that wasn't present in the patient's EHR.
So they were trying to, like, trip VeriFact up.
Exactly, yeah. They wanted to, like, assess its robustness, see how it performed under, less than ideal conditions.
Okay, so how'd it do?
Well, as you might expect, it wasn't quite as accurate when it had all the information, but it still did really well. Like, it still managed to identify a significant chunk of the errors, which is pretty impressive.
Okay, so even with missing information, it's still valuable.
Exactly, yeah. And remember, it's providing those explanations.
Right, right.
So clinicians can understand what it's doing.
Okay, so this is making me think about, like, the different levels of information within a report. So did they look at anything smaller than sentences when they were doing the fact-checking?
Yeah, they did. They actually explored using both complete sentences, A and D smaller units called atomic claims.
Atomic claims.
Yeah.
Okay, what are those?
So think of atomic claims as like the tiniest bits of meaningful information in a sentence.
Okay.
They basically represent like these simple subject-object-predicate relationships.
Okay, but can you give me an example? Like, my brain's not really, like, picturing an atomic claim right now.
Sure. So let's say a sentence in the report says, the patient was diagnosed with pneumonia and prescribed antibiotics.
Okay.
You could break that down into two atomic claims. One would be the patient was diagnosed with pneumonia,
Okay.
and the other would be the patient was prescribed antibiotics.
Okay, so it's like extracting the core facts from a sentence.
Exactly, yeah. And what they found was that using these atomic claims had some advantages.
Okay.
For one, they were much easier for the AI to process and compare against the EHR. It's like you're giving the AI these smaller, more manageable chunks to work with.
Right, yeah. It's probably easier to match up those simple statements with the information in the EHR.
Exactly. And it also allows for more like precise fact-checking. You
Yeah.
can verify individual pieces of information within a sentence rather than treating the whole sentence as one big unit.
Okay, so atomic claims are the ultimate solution then.
Well, not necessarily. There are trade-offs, right?
Right.
So while atomic claims have those advantages, they can also be tricky to extract correctly.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the AI might miss subtle nuances or like relationships between pieces of information.
So you gain precision, but you might miss some of the bigger picture.
Exactly. And the paper goes into a lot of detail about these complexities
Yeah.
and exploring those, pros and cons.
Awesome. Well, did they only look at the information itself, or did they consider, like, how it was presented to VeriFact?
That's a great question. They actually experimented with different ways of presenting the information from the EHR, what
Wait.
they call the reference context.
So it's not just about, like, what information, but also how you present it.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and they found that like the way information is organized and presented could actually influence VeriFact's performance. Like, for example, sometimes presenting the information chronologically, like, a timeline of the patient's medical history led to more accurate results.
So it's like giving the AI a more complete narrative.
Yeah.
Like the story of the patient.
Exactly. It helps the AI understand the context, see how everything fits together.
Wow. This is, like, really making me think about the power of storytelling in healthcare.
Yeah,
It's not just about data points. It's about, like, understanding the patient's whole journey.
you got it. And, this research shows that we're actually making some good progress in teaching AI to understand those narratives.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this is all very exciting, and it seems like AI has, like, incredible potential to really transform healthcare. But I'm also thinking about the ethical implications, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've all heard those, like, sci-fi stories of AI taking over. So should we be, like, worried about handing over too much control in healthcare?
Well, I think it's important to approach AI with like a healthy dose of both optimism and caution, right? It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for, not so good purposes.
Right.
So the focus in healthcare should always be on using AI to like improve patient care and well-being.
Absolutely, yeah. Keeping humans at the center. Using AI to support, not replace.
Exactly. And one of the things that really impressed me about this VeriFact research is they actually built it using publicly available open source AI models.
Wait, really? So they didn't have to, like, start from scratch?
No, they used existing AI models that anyone can access.
Wow.
And that's like a huge deal. It means that theoretically any hospital or research team could like replicate and use this technology.
That's incredible. It makes this, like, cutting-edge AI way more accessible.
Exactly. And it also kind of shows like the incredible pace of AI innovation. Like these really powerful models are becoming more and more available, which, opens up all these possibilities.
Yeah, it's really exciting.
Huh.
But it also makes me think about, like, the potential downsides. How do we make sure these AI systems are used responsibly?
Right.
How do we prevent, like, bias or harm?
Those are really important questions, and it's really all about responsible AI development.
Yeah.
We have to be super mindful of potential biases in the data.
Yeah.
And we also have to think carefully about how these technologies are used and make sure they benefit in all patients.
Right. It's a lot of responsibility on the people developing and deploying these systems.
It is. It's a huge responsibility. But it's not just on the developers. It's on all of us,
Right.
Clinicians, ethicists, policymakers, patient advocates. We all need to work together.
Yeah, it takes a village.
Yeah.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about, like, the potential of VeriFact beyond just fact-checking medical reports.
Yeah.
Like, could this be used for other things?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where it gets really exciting. So imagine using VeriFact to, validate any kind of text that talks about a patient's medical information.
Okay, like, give me some examples.
Sure. So think about, patient education materials,
Okay.
discharge instructions, or even information shared on, online health forums.
Right.
VeriFact could make sure that patients are getting, accurate and reliable information no matter where they're getting it from.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
It is. It's about empowering patients, right?
Yeah.
Giving them the right information.
Totally. This is awesome. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question to consider.
Okay, hit me.
So we saw that VeriFact can already outperform, the average clinician in this specific task.
Right.
What other areas of healthcare could benefit from this kind of AI-assisted validation?
Right.
Could we use it to, reduce errors, improve treatment plan, and even personalize advice?
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
That's the big question. And, it's one that researchers are actively working on. There's so much potential, but we need to be thoughtful, right? Balance the excitement with responsibility.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really incredible deep dive into AI fact-checking. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap for today's deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.